Welcome to our presentation this morning. We are really happy that you have chosen to join us. I think we'll go ahead and get started here. We have a lot of ideas to share with you, but even more, we have an opportunity for you all to share your ideas with us as well. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Those of you who were here for convocation yesterday got to see Shane and Natalie in conversation about some things, and they're going to be discussing today how we can go about integrating student voice across campus. So my name is Kristen Norton, and I am a member of the English department, and I'm starting my 20th year as a teacher in a classroom, my 4th year here at FCC, and my passion has always been student voice. And now that we're coming back into person, I'm able to find some new ways to do this work. And I've got 2 amazing students, and soon we'll have, I think, several more who are joining in this kind of call to action to begin to integrate student voice across campus. So today we are really lucky to have Shane, Lara, and Natalie Ramirez with us. You guys want to say a brief introduction of yourselves? Shane, you can go.
Yeah, so my name is Shane Lara. I am a returning college student. I came back after a year and started my first session in a year in January. So it's good to be back. And I'm also majoring in American Indian Studies.
Awesome.
My name is Natalie Ramirez. I'm a sociology major. I just finished my first year here. So I'm very excited for the fall semester because I recently changed my major. So
yeah, so you'll be stepping into those sociology classes. That's going to be really nice. So we have the chat open. If as students are speaking, there's something you want to put into the chat, I'll be monitoring that. But the way we have today's presentation set up is we kind of have 4 core questions that I think drive our thinking about how to integrate student voice across campus. And as we work through the presentation, we're going to pose these questions, and Shane and Natalie are going to dialogue about them. And then after that, we're going to move into breakout rooms. And Shane is going to facilitate one of those conversations, and Natalie's going to facilitate the other one. And in those rooms, those same 4 questions that they were answering, they're going to pose those questions to the participants in the breakout rooms to see what ideas you all have and can bring to add to our discussion around integrating student voice across campus. So we're really looking forward to sharing ideas with you, but also to getting your ideas and thoughts on how we can bring this forward. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, how do I do this? Really, Natalie, you should be running this. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the first essential question that we really want to look at is, why does student voice even matter on our campus? Why are we having this discussion? Why are we here in this space today thinking about how to integrate it? And I think Shane and Natalie have some thoughts. So the slides have kind of the gist of their ideas put up for you to read, but that's kind of be the starting point for their dialogue back and forth in response to this question: why does student voice matter? So I'm not sure which one of you wants to start that.
Yeah, I could start with the first one. So students represent the future and decision makers within a variety of industries in our community. So essentially that means that a lot of young people need this guidance, and they need to learn how to use their voice, because eventually, they're the future. They're the ones that are going to be taking things over for the next generation. And in order for them to, be as successful as they can be once that time comes to take over, it's like they need to learn how to use their voice. They need to learn how to like speak, for themselves, and use it to the fullest like extent, to be a leader. And it's very important, especially where I come from in Native American culture. That's what we prepared a lot of the younger people to do to eventually take over, which is to teach and nurture them and teach them certain skills. And I don't know if you have something to add to that part, Natalie.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Shane said is right. Like, we are the future. And some of us are very lost. And I think that we kind of need to be taught in a way to like, I think at some point we all had like some sort of like leadership figure that really like showed like took us under their wing and kind of showed us the ropes of like how things are done. Like, and I think that's something that's really important here at City, because there are so many students that don't really have that, in other aspects of their life, whether it's because they're first gen or because, nobody has really asked them how they want to take charge, which I think brings us to our next point, which is students have stories about their lived experiences that should inform decisions that impact students. And basically in this, I kind of want, the meaning behind this is, I feel like a lot of students aren't really aware of the things or the decisions that are being made that have a direct impact on them. Like, I think you've heard, I'm assuming you've heard Shane and I's story. We have very similar experiences, but we have our own stories. And I think every student at City has their own story, even though we can all relate to the same things. So I think, if we get student voice and student input, we can really listen to those things and see how best to help our students.
You
Yeah.
might just want to review, your experiences with your voice and how you're starting to find that now, both you and Shane. And Shane, I know you were getting ready to say something, but maybe just sort of a quick review of your experience with that.
Yeah, so definitely, with like my experiences in first going to college, it was overwhelming experience for me, most definitely. And I didn't really have a mentor or any like mentors in my life, as my parents divorced when I was like a teenager. And so they were like disconnected and off doing their own thing. So I didn't really like want to use my voice. I kind of just wanted to survive and, not really go above that, get out of that survival state of mind. And so that was very difficult. And so once I kind of started meeting like some ethnic studies professors that were very open to, wanting me to use my voice and those kind of things, I started to flourish a little bit more, especially like after being gone from college for a year and me finally coming back this year in January. It was a big like shift, especially like with American Indian studies. I took a lot of ethnic studies classes, and a lot of these teachers, they saw what I said as like worth saying. They saw my voice as important. And so when I had that mentorship under me, I kind of started to flourish and become a lot stronger in my words and my voice and those kind of things. And that was like a big shift for me. And it was big because I never had that. So even when I was 18, 19, 20, I didn't want to use my voice because I never knew how to use one. The way I grew up was children should be seen, not heard. So I never like spoke for myself. I always had someone speaking for me.
I think it's very true that like, having some sort of mentor or a group of mentors is like something that a lot of students really lack. And I think that kind of changed for me because I would, people of like who have a lot of experience, who have taught on many different levels, I think they would, come to my classrooms and be like, hey, give a presentation and kind of be like, hey, I have this open door policy. Like, you're always welcome to come in if you need help, figuring out your major or figuring out like what you want to do. Basically, like telling us we are here to listen to like what you have to say, and we're here to give our support and give our experience and our basically like our thoughts.
Yeah, and I also want to add, Natalie, to your point, where it says students have stories about their lived experience. Those are really, really important. The students' lived experience is not typically the same as the lived experience, the current lived experience of faculty and administrators. And so even if there's some similarities from the past, sometimes when you move out of that space, you forget it. And I think it's really important to stay in touch with that lived experience that our students are having day to day as we think about decisions that are going to impact them, rather than just assume what we think that they need or think we know. I think it's important to ask them to share those stories. Do you guys have any other thoughts on this particular question before we move on to the next one?
Just like one quick thought, just talking about the stories about their experiences. I think it's good to hear those stories because it brings a perspective of students like going to college current day, and each like experience is never the same. They're all very unique in different circumstances. So, you know, it's also good to know that, you know, everybody kind of like has a story, but it's good to hear those perspectives from a group because it's a unique perspective. It's something that maybe most people haven't really heard. And once people start talking, like more people will understand and hear those kind of things. And it's important to understand, you know, where they're coming from.
Yeah, that idea of multiple perspectives. Go ahead, Natalie.
I think once you really start listening to people's like true stories, they get more comfortable telling them, and it just makes them a stronger advocate for themselves. Because again, like going back to what we talked about yesterday, like it's really important to have empathy with these students because a lot of times they're not able to really, they don't feel comfortable advocating for themselves, even if they think like, you know, the struggle that I'm going through is just like an excuse. You know, sometimes like you as professors are able to point them in the right place to like get help or, you know, access different resources.
Great. And I think that helps us to transition to our next question, which yeah. So it's obvious that students are important stakeholders within the FCC community. And it's obvious that as such, they should have opportunities to present their perspectives in all spaces where decisions regarding them are being made. So we come to the next question, which is, why is there such low student participation and involvement on our campus? And I think, Natalie, you and Shane have some thoughts on this. Keep in mind, I remind the participants here with us today that you guys are going to be answering these questions as well. So thinking about what your ideas are and your experiences and thoughts on these different questions, we will definitely be seeking your input later. But Shane and Natalie, what do you want to share? Shane, maybe you want to start us off with the doomerism.
Yeah, so the word doomerism is actually like a philosophy that's kind of been adopted by the younger generation. So essentially, it is the belief that no matter what you do, no matter how hard you work, things will never get better and things will never change. So when somebody gets into this mindset of like being a doomer, you know, they see no point in doing anything. So therefore, they don't do anything. They just kind of stay depressed and they just stay stuck in the cycle of a mindset and nothing ever changes. And of course, if you're never doing anything and you're never moving, it's just going to cause you to be like more depressed, and it's just an increasing cycle. And you know, that's why there's like, for example, there's a lot of things like low youth voter turnout. A lot of them don't see the point of voting. And it's like just with involvement, they don't see the point of involvement because they're like, well, for one, no one's going to listen. No one's going to hear what I say anyway. And I'm not going to change anything. I'm a youth. Youth can't change anything. So what's the point? I'm just going to try to survive, and I'm going to be in that survival mind state. And I'm not going to try anymore. Like there is no point to it. And it's just a thing a lot of people fall into, where they're just so focused on themselves and just simply surviving and not going beyond anywhere else. So the doomerism philosophy is kind of gained some steam, you know, especially with the younger people, and a lot of them really don't have hope that anything's gonna get better. And I don't know if you want to bounce off of that, Natalie.
Yeah, I think it's really easy for students to kind of get in like a negative mindset because again, like the whole idea of things snowballing, like if there's one small failure, like that's just gonna lead to another thing and another thing. Like if I don't understand this one concept, it's just going to keep going. And I think a lot of students have the mindset that there's so much going on around the world, or around the world around me, that like, why does school even matter? You know, because you have to consider like the students at Fresno City, like they're kind of already questioning like whether they should be here or not. And I think that kind of goes for all students, but I think specifically at City, because you know they've been historically dismissed and whatnot. And I think that another way that they've been dismissed, you know, not only academically, but like with their voice, like, you know, there's not really a proper space for them to express their opinions, because, you know, there kind of has never been. I think that when administrators kind of like put programs, let's say programs together that are supposed to help students, it's kind of like, I mean, I'm sure y'all like go based on like facts and statistics and whatnot, but it's never like outreach with the students where we're asking them what works best for them or what can help them the most. So it's almost like a guessing game on like what we think can help them, and like trial and error, which anything is like trial and error. But I think that if we outreach with our students, we can really create a super successful programs, or a bunch of programs. Because, and then going back to like the whole first generation, like you should be seen and not heard. I think a lot of people who identify as being first gen, they never really had a voice to begin with. So it's really important to try to like train these students to use their voice and where to use it, and connect them with like who actually wants to hear, and who actually, you know, let's say has the funding to be able to help. Shane, if you want to add.
Yeah, so when you bring up like students have grown up being told that they should not be seen or heard, and that's a mentality I think a lot of us grew up with. But for me, I grew up under a military father in the Marine Corps. So, you know, growing up, I was always like told not to share my opinion. And if I ever did, you know, there's like, no, you don't get an opinion. You're just a stupid kid, you know, like you need to be quiet. You don't know anything because you're not an adult. You're not like as old as me. You don't know anything essentially. So, you know, in turn, because I was told that, you know, so much, I didn't want to be seen or heard, whether it be in the class or be involved in anything. I didn't really want to, you know, I just kind of wanted to be out of sight. And that happens for like a lot of people. They hear these things and they internalize it. And once you play it enough, you start to believe it like a lot. And it really starts to, it really like kind of starts like to snowball kind of thing, and you end up like believing like what your parent or whatever your figure said, and you stay stuck that way, and you don't want to, and you just want to stay closed off.
Yeah, I think historically students have been dismissed, and this is certainly in the K-12 system that you all are coming out of. They've been dismissed. That for sure is 100% true. And so they haven't really been taught how to use their voice. They haven't been taught even that they have a voice to use. And so when they arrive at college where there's these opportunities, sometimes they don't know that the opportunities exist or how to take advantage of them. They have not historically been asked to participate. And so although we have ASG, students aren't always aware of what they do or how to become involved or any of that. So I think really understanding that historically students have not had their opinion front and center of anything, despite the fact that educational institutions are designed to serve them, is something we really need to think about changing. Do you all have any final thoughts on this question?
Good morning, Kristen. I'm excited to be in your session today because I'm a big fan of yours. I refer students to you on purpose because you have that approachability. But I work in particular with a couple of sets of populations that are very reminiscent of the questions that you're posting here. I work with the incarcerated at Fresno County juvenile facility. And I also work with foster youth. My passion has always been working with at-risk, high-risk youth, most of which are first-generation college-bound. And boy, you're really touching on some points here that are near and dear to my heart. But what I see is if they don't see someone that looks like them, that comes from their walk of life, it's very hard for them to imagine themselves there. And in this day and age, I think Fresno City College has done a phenomenal job of marketing itself and putting itself out there, making the information available. However, that doesn't mean that the student can see themselves there. And I work with a population that oftentimes says that's for the smart kid, that's for the other kid, that's for the kid that comes from the other side of the tracks. And that's not me. I don't fit that profile. Where I feel once we have them enrolled in classes, I teach a class as well, typically during the summer, where I feel students start to become more engaged and start to bite off and have a sense of ownership on campus is, believe it or not, discussion boards, where they're able to share an opinion or a thought and put it out there for them. Some of them, that is a huge step of faith and confidence for them to write their personal opinion or their feeling about something, as trivial as it may be. But to get the feedback from their peers gives them a sense of acceptance, gives them a sense of belonging, and it gives them a sense of ownership. And as an instructor, I think it's imperative for us then to build on that and to further encourage that. So thank you so much for your questions here.
Wonderful. Thanks for that input. And you know, to bring into the discussion those highly marginalized populations of the formerly incarcerated and also the foster youth, right? They've had their voices taken away in ways that are even beyond what the average student has experienced. So I appreciate that reminder. All right, let's take a look at the next slide if I can get there. I really don't know why I'm trying to do this when I have Natalie who could do it so much better. So the question then becomes, if we know some reasons why student voice matters, and we know some reasons why students are not speaking up and using that voice, how do we go about then making that shift? How do we start to engage students in this important work?
Well, I think we just got a great example from one of our own professors, or that, you know, like discussion boards is, you know, one of the first ways that teachers can really see the potential in one of their students, or see, you know, like they have all these great ideas, but I'm barely hearing about them now, you know? And I think that that's honestly so true. Like, I think when I'm given options of like how to express myself in the classroom, that's when I feel like I'm most, you know, I guess empowered, going back to that from yesterday. And I think it's really important for professors to give us those opportunities, or even, you know, administrators, when they're, you know, very visibly there to listen to us and listen to what we have to say. And I think that there are a lot of clear, like, I guess you can say, platforms that we can start using to further advocate for student voice, that I think would just benefit mostly students. I mean, obviously we need your guys' help, but I think that there's some valuable opportunities out there that already exist.
Right. And I do believe that it does start with, you know, more communication between like a student and a teacher, because I feel like once once like once like you say like something we say is like valued, that only encourages us to speak a lot more. I think even though like for years I believed I didn't really have a voice, the moment somebody like gave me the opportunity to speak and then they acknowledged what I said as important, you know, that slowly got me out of it. That took away years of me not having a voice to finally like in like a few weeks of me actually like improving my voice. It was like night and day. And I think that communication and I think the facilitation of a discussion, not just like, you know, between the student and the teacher, but with other peers as well, I think that does have like such an active effect. That positive positive reinforcement really is something that works, because I feel like a lot of us youth, you know, we just want to be heard and we want to hear that like our voice does matter and that we can make a difference, because historically, you know, we've been told that, you know, we can't do any of that. You know, we're young, we don't have any power. And I think that's like where it really starts, and that's where we can start putting these building blocks up kind of thing, and you know, start slowly like growing and being able to use those voice, and eventually those kind of things turn into leadership roles. And it's not just like one professor or one group, it's sometimes it takes multiple mentors, and I have had multiple mentors throughout my life, whether it be at Fresno City with my ethnic studies professors or outside of the college down in Texas, Louisiana, where my tribe is and where my people are. Those were mentors to me too, who have made me feel valued and encouraged me to chase after what makes me happy and what my dreams are, like, so to speak. And I kind of wanted to also like touch on the visible opportunities that are clearly communicated to student. So definitely, I feel like certain like things, certain programs for students should be a little bit more visible. As like when I was first starting for like my first year, I didn't really know about any of the ethnic studies clubs, or, you know, I didn't know that like these certain clubs had benefits for, you know, certain students. I wasn't really aware, and I only heard about the Puente Club like through a conversation. And I asked a student after class, I'm like, hey, what was that club you were talking about? Like, they said they could help me with these things. And a lot of that was like I really didn't know. Of course, you know, there was Club Rush, but I didn't know about like the certain benefits. I thought a club was something you just kind of join and you like just kind of hang out, so to speak, because I've never really like been in a lot of clubs in high school, so I didn't even really know much about that. So if it was like more visible and more information, I think that would be beneficial to other students. And I'm not sure what you think on that, Natalie, or if you have something on that.
Yeah, I think it's really important that you bring up leadership roles, because I mean, you know, I think looking at this for the first time, it really seems like, you know, like this is a lot of hard work. Like we're completely changing a system to work more for students. But in reality, like there's already a lot of places where there are emerging leaders on campus, and we just need to, again, like going back to like, you know, just asking for their opinion. I mean, like, I think it's crazy sometimes, like even something as simple as a discussion board, like students don't know what to say because they've never really been asked. Like they're kind of like, well, like it almost like baffles them that they're being asked for their opinion. And I think that, yeah, like there are, again, like there are a lot of visible opportunities where students are able to communicate with professors and with administrators. But I think we just need to open those things up and really, I mean, first and foremost, like students need to be given the opportunity to communicate and give their opinion. And second, I mean, obviously it's on them to choose if they want to do it or not, because some students aren't going to be ready. You know, like I really had to push myself to, I think throughout my life, to really be able to like speak about certain things or be able to give like a decent presentation, or, you know, those things fluctuate. Like you can be really good at it at one point, but then you might need to kind of get that experience again. So I think it's really important to consider those things as well.
I think you bring up a really good point, Natalie. Not all students are ready to explore their voice, but so many are, and just need that guidance and that support. And so I think in keeping in mind as a faculty member, you know, not all students are going to be up for this, but to create those spaces for students who are. And I think we as faculty and also the administrators really need to create platforms that are intentionally moving students into spaces, students who have historically been silenced and disempowered. Those spaces are not as prevalent on our campus as they perhaps could be. And so I think we're working towards how to develop those spaces. So let's move on to the next slide. And ask the question then, how can we build platforms for student voice, right? So I think this is, we've been touching on this as we moved through our questions today. So if we know that student voice matters and we know that we're not getting that student voice participation and some reasons why, and we know that building platforms for that student voice is then part of the solution, how do we go about doing that? That's really the question here. So we've been talking around these ideas. Let's just dig into them for a few minutes, and then we'll move on to some of the things that are actually happening on campus, some potential starting points.
I think for me, it was like, for my experience, it was very much like I had to have a lot of these like one-on-one or like, you know, small conversations about like things I wasn't comfortable with or things I didn't even realize, you know, concerning like school things and like, I guess the system kind of already put in place at City. And I think that that's when I was able to be really comfortable and like share with y'all, like, you know, my experiences and like why these things matter. And I think that's one of the first steps to being like, you know, I am comfortable doing this. So now I'm able to like start sharing it. And once I share it within like a smaller population, I'm able to like more widespread what I have to say.
Right, especially when you're talking about those one-on-one conversations to like finally kind of open up. That's like a really good point, because when I was like going through everything and the adults in my family were kind of disconnected doing their own thing, one of the first people I went to was a professor. And I told that story while we were like in the auditorium where I was talking about my professor Chacon, who taught Puente and English. And so I went to him for a lot of things, and I actually was like open and honest about a lot of the stuff I was going through. And then therefore, like now, you know, talking and having that rapport with him and him telling me his experiences, that kind of encouraged me to like be more open. And that's why I can talk about those things now and be okay with it and look back on it as like I was there, but you know, now I'm here. But I also wanted to like touch on the mentor students and provide them with different perspectives and guidance on how to develop their voice and use it to advocate for themselves in more public spaces. So one of the things I really liked that some clubs did is that they had little events. You know, for example, the Cesar Chavez Day, which I really enjoyed, because when I went up and I signed up for it to do some spoken word, I was telling them, I was like, I wanted to check to see if I was on the list, and there was only like me and 2 other people. And so after the 3 of us went, the guy who was running it was saying, hey, like, would anyone in the crowd like to come up and like participate? And I think like 3, 4, 5 people actually came up. It was a decent number. So I definitely think we could expand on stuff like that. Like, it's good. That's like really good. But I definitely think we can expand more on it, more opportunities for them to go up and say something, because I noticed that like once they gave that opportunity out and said, would anyone like to come up? People really did. And I think we need more like little events like that, or a little more like programs like that to kind of get them up there. And I think that would be like really cool. What do you think about that?
I think,
I mean,
sorry, Natalie. I think what both of you have touched on, and I've kept meaning to point it out, which is students can also serve as mentors to students, right? So we're talking about the role of faculty and administrators, and the more we get students involved, the more other students see students doing it and see that, oh, it's possible. This goes back to, I think, the point you were making earlier, way earlier, Natalie, about how students, or maybe it was Renee, don't see themselves in these roles. And so if they can see other students doing it, if they can see other students up on stage, if they can see other students engaging and telling their stories and sharing their lived experiences, I think that will also help support students who might be not a little bit reluctant, not as willing to step forward initially, but once you have the students who pave the way, it can really open up the floodgates, I think, for a lot of other students. So sorry, Natalie, back to you.
I was just gonna add that, I mean, in reality, what y'all are doing is preparing us for the real world, or like, to get a job or form some sort of career, or like go to graduate school or whatnot. And I think that, while we are a Hispanic serving institution, I think that, outside of city, it's kind of not that way. I mean, we're in the Central Valley, so, a lot of people of color, but I think that, for me, something that I had to realize is that I can talk about my experiences and I could talk about, this or that, but I'm still not in the place where I'm comfortable, like taking up space, where, the people around me are predominantly white. Like in those types of spaces, I don't really know how to use my voice. And I think that that's a really valuable, I guess you can say, skill that, professors can teach us, or mentor us or nurture us, whatever you think is best. Because I think that that's like I think that's something a lot of the students at City can really relate to. And I think that that could have even been like, something that impedes them trying to, pursue a certain career, whatnot, because they're like, well, again, going back to, well, I don't see people who look like me doing these things. So like, do I even belong here? But yes.
Yeah, great point about learning to take up the space that you deserve, right? That's part of what this is. So, well, as we start to think about how to make this shift on our campus, how do we leverage student groups that are already in place? Obviously, the Associated Student Government is one of those organizations that is designed to serve student voice across our campus. And then Shane and Natalie both have some other ideas that they want to share. Shane, you want to talk about your idea?
Yeah. So definitely, we would love to work with the associated, like ASG, of course, and definitely like build a relationship and build communication with them and work with them. And I feel like student voice and student government really go hand in hand with a lot of these things, and definitely working together could definitely make the voice even stronger. But another thing that I kind of wanted to bring up was also the collaboration and communication amongst different clubs on campus. And, for example, like when I was like with a lot of clubs, I noticed that a lot of them never really worked too much together. It was always like they were kind of doing their own things. And I know they sometimes mention about these like big projects of like working with other clubs, but it never really got off the ground too much. And I think it would be really cool, especially like among the ethnic studies groups, for example, Puente and NISA, which is the Native American Student Organization, and also like the African American ethnic group as well in their club. And I think it would be cool if there was communication between them and for them to work together. I feel like when the youth like work together, it can like help increase voice, like Kristen was saying, that we can also be mentors to other youth who are a little younger as well. And I think it would be very cool if we could like reach out and have that collaboration like with all of them, and that would kind of create a sense of community and a sense of belonging as well.
Yeah, and also to get discussions going across those different groups, I think can strengthen the equity work on our campus. So yeah, I love that idea, Shane. And Natalie, what's your idea?
Yeah, so I kind of already touched on this, but just to briefly like go over ASG, I mean, like for me, like when I was in high school, I was like I was the ASB vice president, and I was like, I thought that what the work that we're doing now is what we were going to be doing like way back when I was in high school. And, I was like very much surprised. And so I hope that like, now that I have the right connections and the right mentors, I hope that that's something that I can do, because I've always been really passionate about, I guess, like reform and like, really working for the students, especially like the majority of us, or the majority of the demographics at City are, a lot of POCs. So I think that that's something that I'm very excited for. We'll become a senator in the fall, but to touch on my idea is that, again, like these platforms already exist at City, so it's not really like, I mean, it's going to be hard work because we are reforming systems that have already been in place, and we are going to have to teach students that have historically not had an opinion or had a voice. We're going to like do all these changes, but at the end of the day, like things like past leaders and ETC leaders, or, all the types of tutors, like what I realized when we were discussing these things is that, these tutors never really like, I didn't realize that they didn't, the professor that they had, one, that they didn't like take the class, and two, that they weren't allowed to like, or I guess like not allowed, but I wasn't aware that they didn't actively, give input, because to me, I'm like, well, the students are the ones who know students best, like they're the ones who have taken the classes. They know the sticking points. They know, they're the ones constantly in contact with the students and having active conversations with them. And again, getting to know their opinion and their story. So they're the ones that really understand like what works and what doesn't. And I think that it was really bizarre to me to find out that, these tutors didn't actively have conversations with professors that they're, I guess, working for, in order to, create a better balance for, not necessarily better balance for students, but really have that communication where, this is what is working for students. This is something that maybe we can go over in class and really try to clarify. So that's my idea.
Right. I think it's that idea of closing that feedback loop, right? So the professors give the instructions, and then the tutors work with the students to help them. But the information doesn't always get back to the professors about what worked and what didn't, in an organized and kind of meaningful way. So thinking about closing that feedback loop and really listening to the past leaders and the ETC leaders and the tutors who are on the front lines, kind of filling in the gaps of what students were missing or not really understanding, I think is something that's already in place, and it wouldn't be hard to loop them into a conversation to give feedback in some meaningful ways. So this all brings us to the idea of the Student Speakers Forum, and this is going to be a new, I don't even know the right word, work group maybe, that's going to be housed under Academic Senate. Academic Senate, works with the 10+1, and the number 5 in that 10+1 has to do with student success and participation. And so all of this is leading towards the Student Speakers Forum, which is a collaborative initiative where students and faculty will be working together to achieve the following goals: to recruit students, and in doing that, to collaborate with ASG, to collaborate with other student clubs to expand membership, and then to identify, I don't know how I always do this, help. There we go. To identify spaces throughout the campus where student voice and perspective is necessary, to help inform the decision-making process. So building new platforms and promoting the Student Speakers Forum throughout our departments and divisions and other spaces, and letting our colleagues know that this work is going to be happening across our campus, and that, there's different ways for you all to dive in and to support that. And then to prepare our students to actively participate in various capacities. It takes a lot of training for students to feel comfortable in these spaces. It takes a lot of support. It takes a lot of mentoring. It takes a lot of work on behalf of the faculty and the administrators. And it takes a lot of work on behalf of the students to put in that time, effort, and energy to build those skills. And so we're really talking about some intensive work that needs to be done in order to build this in a meaningful way. But I'm hoping that those of you who have joined us here today might be willing to start to engage in that work in your own spaces, in your own ways. And so what I would like to do for probably the next 15 minutes before we wrap up is move everyone into some breakout rooms. And in those breakout rooms, you're going to get a chance to dialogue with either Natalie or Shane and go over your thoughts with regard to these questions that we have been looking at together and hearing their thoughts on. So I'm going to create some breakout rooms. I hope that you will be willing to stick around and join Shane or Natalie in conversation there. Share your thoughts and ideas about how we can move this really important work forward. Okay. So I'm gonna create those right now. And there's gonna be 2 rooms.
Miss Norton, just if we can just remind you, the 2 interpreters can hop in that room with.
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Yes. I will make sure that that happens.
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm going to move him to room 2. And then this is great. Okay. I think we're all set up. I just want to make sure that we don't have, yeah. Okay. There we go. Natalie's in one room and Shane is in the other room. I've got the interpreters in there with Salvador. And so I think we should be good. Shane and Natalie, are you ready to run these discussions?
Yes.
Okay. And Natalie, you are too?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to open up these breakout rooms. I've asked Shane and Natalie to take notes on the ideas that you all share in there. So that they can bring them back and we can work with them. And then after we are done with the breakout rooms, Natalie has created a survey form to ask you to maybe put some of your ideas in writing. 15 minutes is not always enough time to share everything, and sometimes you don't get that chance to do it in the discussion groups. So we're going to have a survey where you can also share your thoughts. In fact, Natalie, do you think maybe we should open up the survey now?
Yeah, if you just go to the next slide, they can scan the QR code, or if they want to copy letter for letter the link.
Yeah, okay, so there's the QR code. And then can you copy and paste that link into the chat, Natalie?
Yes.
So that's the survey that kind of goes along with the discussion. And then after the discussion, we'll come back together to share some final thoughts on this work. Great. So if you guys want to either do the QR code or use the link that Natalie set up and then move into the breakout rooms, I'm going to go ahead and open those. And we'll be back together in about 15 minutes. Great. Welcome back. Oh, look, I see how everybody turned themselves on over there. I can see some faces. That's nice. How did the discussions go in the breakout rooms? Natalie, Shane?
It went well. I think we got a lot of, in my experience, like we had a lot of support for like some of the ideas we already have, like especially considering like the new platforms. And I think that I was able to share like some ideas on how we can, I guess, really start to support students and start to like figure out which students we need to talk to and which students like I guess how to reach certain students that aren't already in like these, that aren't kind of already using their voice, like students that are in clubs or ASG or whatnot.
Great. And Shane, what about in your group?
Oh, it went pretty good. I think I got a lot of like good ideas that we can incorporate into like the idea that we're trying to like, put together and all these this like whole group thing. I think some of the feedback I got will be really useful and add a little bit more layer and dimension to it.
Great. Does anybody who was in those groups have anything they want to share? We're about to wrap up. We have just a few minutes. Is there anything pressing that somebody wants to bring to the whole group, or a question you might have that came up, or anything to add to this conversation before we wrap up?
The one thing that I'll mention is, in our group, there's definitely strong support for incorporating student voice in many of our spaces here on campus, both formal and informal spaces. And the one thing I'll say is that many of us have known this for a very long time. And so what we're really going to need is a lot of support for this, because again, I know that we know this. I know that many of us have thought this. It's just, it's one of these things where I think it can become easy to get focused on other things and not really do the work of making sure that this happens. So Kristen and I have been talking about this for a little while now, and I know that at the very least, the two of us will continue working on this until there is more support for student voice in those spaces. But any support that we can get from any of the faculty and or staff that are here would be really great, because the more support that we get, the easier it will be to realize this goal. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Michael. You're absolutely right. There's a lot of work to be done in this area. This is not something that just happens because we wish it would. It's not something that just happens because we have a lot of students on campus. It's a very intentional cultivating and nurturing of student voice. It's a very intentional building of both formal and informal spaces, as you said, for that student voice to be heard. And really, it requires the leadership of faculty and administrators across campus. It can't just be one or two people here and there to really change the culture of our school and to shift what has, been a historical way of addressing student needs, is to make assumptions about what they need, what their experiences are like, rather than actually asking them to share those experiences and to participate in the process. So it's going to be a really, really steep uphill climb, but I can't think of more worthy work. I really, really can't. We're all at FCC because we care about students and want to see them be successful. I am guessing you especially want to do that in this particular way if you've come to this session today. So really, this is a big call to action for all of us to think about how we can engage in this work in our own departments and in our own divisions, and how we can start to bring students into this work, because the work really does need to be student-led and faculty and administrative supported. So if you have any students also that you see are ready to step into some training to do this work, that would also be great, because like I said, the Student Speakers Forum is going to be a collaborative. It's going to include faculty as well as students that are working together to make this happen. It's really a joint effort. So I really appreciate everyone who took the time to come today. I really, really appreciate Natalie and Shane for joining me in this fight as the foundation for the student voice, which I know we're going to be building on. And I appreciate all of you who took the time to fill out the form that Natalie made and provide some feedback for us, particularly if you said you would be interested in continuing to be part of this movement forward on our campus.
So Kristen, one
yeah.
last thing. I'm going to tell Dr. Pimentel a win for next year convocation. I would have preferred a hands-on workshop for an hour of us how to learn how to do incorporating student voice instead of bringing an outside speaker. I think that would be a win shifting our culture. Yeah, so I'm just going on the record. That will be like a mission of mine. I want to see this become part of the larger awareness of our faculty through convocation.
Right. I think that's a really good point, Natalie, right? One step at a time. First, we have student speakers that people say, wow, students actually have a voice worth listening to. And then we say, yeah, here's what you can do, right? So I think that's a logical next step. I super appreciate that. Natalie, thank you for your support and your vision of what some next steps might be, right? We're all in this together. There's many paths forward, and I think it's going to take all of us to really do this work. So thank you all so much for joining us this morning. And for those of you who are going to continue in that work, I look forward to being in contact with you and figuring out how we can move forward together. Have a great rest of your day. It looks like the rain has stopped. So, it's the sun is back like it always is in August, but that was a nice treat we had, as well as being here together and sharing time again with Shane and Natalie. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone.
Great job. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.